Let's turn to a different topic, which is precisely what I was going to raise, Cuba. The Venezuela example shows what happens potentially when the United States becomes somewhat responsible for another country, because we are embroiled now in Venezuela. We are not embroiled in Cuba yet. However, George Will has a column in the Washington Post today warning against direct intervention in Cuba, citing Iran as an example of how things can go awry. What's your take on Donald Trump's contention when he said Cuba's next? Is that a good idea?
If by direct intervention you mean military intervention, I think we're at some distance from doing that kind of thing. Cuba, I might add, is not a small place. It's not the island of Grenada. If you stretch Cuba out from east to west, it's like going from Washington to Chicago. So a military intervention would be a significant operation. I'm sure plans have existed for 60 years for this, but nonetheless, I'm hesitant to suggest that's what's going on. But when you talk about intervention in a larger sense, we're up to our elbows in it already. With
a blockade,
exactly. And various kinds of subterranean conversations with members of the Castro family. At the same time, they seem to be taking rather aggressive steps to rework their economy in some way that is, hopefully more acceptable to President Trump. But where this is all going to go is not clear. What is certainly true is they're running out of basic supplies for food and fuel, and therefore this cannot go on indefinitely without some kind of decisions on their side and on our side also.
What outcome would you say would be the best? What would you like to see?
Well, a true transition to democratic governance, a lifting of sanctions to go hand in hand with that, a return to free markets and a democratic system. But that's an enormous agenda. If you look at Eastern Europe, an area which I know you have spent a good deal of time in, these kinds of transitions are enormously complex. You have also the issue of confiscated properties from the Cuban Revolution. There's properties of American businesses which were seized. The courts are allowing ExxonMobil to go forward with certain demands for compensation. Then you have all the Cuban Americans living in the United States, in Miami and New York, not to mention elsewhere in the country. They don't have the kind of legal right to demand that the U.S. Espouse their claims and intervene on their behalf, but they will be watching what happens next. If there's any kind of transition, do these people have a right to compensation? How will it be paid? I mean, in Germany, I believe, in the East, there was a huge fund that was created to deal with compensation. Would you do something similar here? Who would pay for this fund? There's not exactly an equivalent to West Germany in this scenario, except the United States. Would the international financial institutions be part of it? All these things would need to be worked out. But this kind of transition hasn't even really begun. All you're getting is some talks between members of the Castro family and representatives of Secretary Rubio.
What do you think is the likelihood of a less benign scenario in which the Cuban government seeks to replicate the measures that it took during the Mariel boat lift, which is essentially dumping people from its jails, and you have, let's say you have internal upheaval in Cuba, and then do you foresee, is there a possibility of waves of refugees? Governor Ron DeSantis has been very cautious and warned the Trump administration against pushing Cuba to the brink. What's your view?
I don't think you can rule out anything. I mean, the priority of the Cuban government, like the priority of the Venezuelan government, the Iranian government, is to stay in power, whatever it takes. If it means jettisoning Marxism, Leninism to stay in power, they'll do it. If it means jettisoning, hundreds of thousands of Cubans, they'll do that too. Their goal is not to handle a transition that leaves them on the outside somewhere. They want to find a way to remain in office and, of course, free from any legal consequences for their years of human rights violations.
What sort of apparatus has the Cuban government built up with its state security? Is it as reliable as the one in Iran appears to be with the IRGC, or is it shakier?
There certainly exists an apparatus of repression in Cuba that has existed, since the days of the revolution. You have a state security service that was created, with assistance from the Soviet Union. You have these committees for the defense of the revolution, which were kind of a block level, mechanisms of control. Question is, to what degree have they been hollowed out just as a result of the economic problems that exist? And what can you do if you have no gas to fill your cars up, and to be able to arrest people? And so there's a lot of uncertainty in that.
Interestingly, in Crimea, the Russians are running into the same thing, where they actually don't have enough fuel.
That is really the basis for a modern state, whether it's a democratic one or a dictatorial one. Is you need gasoline for your vehicles, you need electrical power.
Let's put it more bluntly. Is the Cuban Revolution, Castro comes to power in 1950, stages the revolution 59, Batista is out. Is that revolution finally coming to an end? Is Donald Trump going to be that one American president who actually managed to lance this spoil? Or as Khrushchev referred to Berlin, he called it a bone in my throat. Is Trump is he going to celebrate a huge victory here?
Well, whatever it is, he will celebrate it as a victory. I think we can be clear on that. The question is, what does he want? And, that issue is in Venezuela. We've already seen that, which is, he takes a very narrow kind of economistic view of, what is to be what the transition should be. It seems to, in Venezuela, the immediate goal is to bring American oil companies back into the country, almost whether they want to be there or not, because they have worldwide opportunities to look at. In Cuba, you just don't hear him always talking about, the will of the Cuban people being respected. It seems to go back to the idea of, an economic transition and a political transition, to come.
So are we back to the 1890s when American presidents pursued imperial aims on behalf of big business?
Whether big business wants it or not. We're talking about a president that seemed to feel Greenland needed to be annexed at one point, and that Canada should be the 51st state. Now, you can always, you have to apply some kind of deflator to Trump's rhetoric on all these things to some degree. But whatever his priorities are, democracy just, isn't the bell that rings in his brain the way it does, has historically, for good or bad, been part of, America's political rhetoric, especially with regard to Latin America, ever since the end of the military regimes in the beginning of the 1980s. Solidifying democracy has always been a priority. The feeling is that one way or another, that's in our long-term interest. But I just don't see that as exactly where this government is going. It seems to be very much are you a friend or are you not a friend?